All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream with Matt Petrick and Mount Gay Rum. We have special guests Trudiann Branker, Raphael, Grisoni, and Fitzroy Smith here. I'm going to let Matt introduce you more formally to everyone in just a moment. Real quick before we get started, my name's Will Hookinga from Savvy.co. And I know I recognize many names that have been with us before in the chat already, but if you're joining us for the first time, you'll see a chat to your right. Feel free to say hello, let us know where you're tuning in from. You'll also see at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says Ask a Question. So if you have any questions at all for any of our special guests or for Matt throughout the presentation, just enter them in down there. Matt and I are going to be keeping an eye on those, and we'll try to save some room at the end for a little Q&A. And then last but not least, please feel free to invite any of your friends to join us. There's a share button in the top right corner, so you can use that to easily invite others to join us. So with that said, Matt, I will turn things over to you now.
Thank you, Will. It's great to be back here. I believe this is our 7th session with WRSPA. The idea here is that we as WRSPA, the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association, we are trying to bring our member distilleries, of which there are probably 25 or so, across 14 countries in the Caribbean, and trying to bring our viewers behind the scenes to get people to know the actual people making the rum and tell them the real story of how it all works, not just a marketing presentation. We want to get the distillers and the blenders and all those people here to really share what's so amazing about their rum. So like I said, I think this is the 7th such presentation we've done. We've visited many countries. Here we're in Barbados, home of Mount Gay, the world's longest running rum producer. And so I'm very excited about this. I visited Mount Gay myself in October of 2018 as part of a press tour there, and I got the pleasure of meeting Raphael, Trudiann, and Fitzroy for the first time there, and I've been grateful to be in contact with them ever since, and I'm grateful that they're on camera now. So why don't we jump in and introduce yourselves really quickly before we go into the presentation. Trudiann, why don't you start?
No problem. I'm Trudiann Branker. I'm the master blender here at Mount Gay. I've been the master blender for last 18 months or so, and I would have spent 5 years with Alan, the previous master blender. And yeah, I'm happy to be here today.
Yes, excellent. Fitzroy.
Hi, I'm Fitzroy Smith. I've been with Mount Gay now just about 15 years. I would have had many roles, I would say, at Mount Gay. So I started in aging and blending. I spent about 5 years in quality assurance, and I've had some stints between aging and blending, distillery, and bottling. I would say over the last 4 to 5 years again. So this is one of my first presentations. So I'm very excited, to be able to share some of my limited knowledge with the folks out there.
We're very honored. And then I noticed that Raphael has quite the collection of red Mount Gay hats.
Like that.
Introduce ourselves and maybe also tell us a little bit about the myth of the legend of the Mount Gay hats.
Sure. So my name is Raphael Grisoni. I'm the managing director of Mount Gay Distillery since 2008. So a bit more than 12 years on the island now. And as you can hear from my accent, I'm French, but I love being in Barbados, and I'm totally Bajanized, as we say now. So much that when I go to France sometimes, and when I say I come back home, it's come back to Barbados, not come back to France. Yeah, what you're seeing behind, it's my office, by the way. So I like to collect the red cap, the famous red cap. Mount Gay sponsoring is very linked with selling from inception, I would say, because there's a natural connection between selling and the universe of rum, as we were using sailing ship to export rum to Europe, but also to what became America. So from early, there's a tight connection with sailing. But it's true that from the 70s, Mount Gay started to sponsor regatta. First, because in Barbados we are sailing, but also in the Caribbean and in other countries. So we started to do those red caps. Maybe I can pick up one. by chance, and well, it's one I did, by the way. Another one I did. So we sponsor lots, like 300 regattas across the world. And what we do is that we are creating those red caps where you have the name of the regatta, you have the year of the regatta, and really we are giving that to the participant of the regattas. So it's really a badge of honor, saying, well, I was there. I was in this regatta. Of course, I drank Mount Gay, by the way. But it's more a sign of recognition between sailors. It became a sign of recognition between sailors. And there's really a red cap community or society, if you want. And it's funny because when you're wearing a red cap and you're traveling, there's always somebody, could be in the US, could be in the UK, Australia, wherever, or in other islands, saying, "Oh yeah, you did this regatta. Oh, I have also a red cap, etc." So it's always a good starter for a conversation. So I have quite a lot effectively in my office. I'm a sailor myself, but maybe half of them just were sent to me. I didn't participate to all, so I'm a bit cheating here, but it's okay.
It's a great story. I hear they're quite sought after. So
totally, yeah.
All right, so let's jump into the slides.
Yeah, I'm going to start this presentation. I think it is quite important just to set up a bit the decor, the setup of what is Mount Gay. Of course, we talk about Barbados, and maybe we can start by saying that Barbados is the easternmost island of the Caribbean. And when you look at, we don't have here, but when you look at the map of the Caribbean, Barbados is quite unique. So it's really set aside of the arch, the Caribbean arch, and for a reason, because it's not a volcanic island like many of almost all of the islands of the Caribbean. In fact, it's a coral reef that was pushed up or pushed out of the water by the tectonic movement. And so we have really a unique island made of coral stone. And you will see that it's quite important. So it gives a uniqueness to our soil, but you will see also that the uniqueness of the soil is delivering a quite unique perspective on agriculture. And of course, what is interesting to us on sugarcane. But what is also interesting about Mount Gay and about the heritage, I like to start with that, is that Mount Gay is the oldest rum distillery in the world. So it's true that everything happened, well, there's debate, but it seems to be that everything about rum started in Barbados. We know that the sugarcane was brought up. Sugarcane is originated from Papua New Guinea, and after several travel went to China. Marco Polo brought it to the Mediterranean, went to Italy, and then developed in the Mediterranean Sea, to Spain, to the Canary Island. And it's true that it's Christopher Columbus in his second trip, voyage back then, brought it to the Caribbean and to what was then called Hispaniola. But back then, which is now, Dominican Republic and Haiti. But he brought sugarcane for the sugar production, and it was never intended to produce any rum. It's only later that sugarcane also traveled through the Dutch to Brazil and found a fantastic soil and environment, if you want, weather, water, sun, etc. So great condition to grow sugarcane. And sugarcane was introduced, in fact, to Barbados around the 1630s. Probably there's several stories, but probably by Dutch merchants. And why Barbados, we are saying, is the birthplace of rum, and birthplace of rum in terms of defining the word and using the rum. It's because there's some writing and dating back from the 1640s, stating that rum bouillon was produced in Barbados, and rum bouillon, the contraction came to rum, and rum bouillon was described as this hellish liquor. So we can imagine that yeah, everything started here in Barbados. So at Mount Gay, the first settler of Barbados came in 1625, if I'm not mistaken. So first settlers started to grow indigo, tobacco. Sugarcane came only in the 30s, brought by the Dutch again, with a start with producing sugar. But very quickly, the byproduct of the sugar production, which is the molasses, was not valued at all and was left food for cattle or simply discarded. And some people noticed that, and probably the indentured servant coming from Ireland, that were quite inclined on alcohol consumption, discovered that, yeah, when the rain is coming on, those molasses that were discarded, the natural yeast of the environment coming from the plantation, and you will see why it's important also today, a fermentation due to the condition and the temperature, a natural fermentation started. So this molasses was turned into a kind of wine, if you want. So with 4 or 5 degrees of alcohol, and effectively it became very interesting for the locals to start to use this wine and then to bring the distillation apparatus on the island and start distillation. So it's quite interesting that everything started in Barbados, because sugarcane was brought in Barbados from Brazil, but also you have culturally servants, indentured servants coming from Ireland that knew the distillation process, that's very inclined into alcohol. So it's a good condition. And plus, of course, the English, the settlers, fantastic merchant that started, of course, to export. So distillation at Mount Gay, and we have written evidence that are showing that the first written evidence we found was 1703, was a deed that was showing all the elements present on the plantation, and pot still and distillation and fermentation apparatus were on the plantation. So 1703 is really the date we are referring, making Mount Gay the oldest running rum distillery. But more recently, we did some more research in the Barbados archive, and we found some other documents dating back to 1654. So definitively, we could say that Mount Gay is the oldest rum distillery. Some other written evidence were showing in 1650 a deed of a treehouse plantation in the south, in St. Philip Parish. Treehouse plantation was distilling as early as 1650, but then effectively stopped distillation. So it's why we're saying that we are the oldest running rum distillery in Barbados and of course in the world.
Yeah, and I'll add in really quick there. When I was writing up my overview of Mount Gay for my website, you shared the 1654 document with me.
Yep.
This is what I do a lot of my rum history work is look through these old documents and try to piece together the picture and the puzzle, and it's challenging to read that old sort of handwritten.
Yeah, that's a good comment. It's true that it's quite difficult to read.
Very difficult to read, but not really plugging my website per se, but there is a larger version of that which is available on the Mount Gay site. So if you do want to actually go see the exact words, they are out there for you if you want to see them. So anyhow. Yeah, keep going.
So yeah, maybe we can go to the next slide, which is talking really about the uniqueness of Barbados. I touched base a bit, saying that it was a coral reef that was pushed out of the water. So it's quite a unique way of giving birth to a country and to a nation later. But so Barbados is unique. So its soil is unique, made of coral stone. And also in Barbados, we don't have surface water. We don't have river. We're not like the beautiful Jamaica, which have lake, rivers, etc., or cascade, or even Guyana, for example. No, the water in Barbados is more underground. And because due to the fact that the soil is made of coral stone, the action of water is digging caves. In lots of places in Barbados, you have underground caves, and those caves generally, and some you can visit, by the way, if you're coming to Barbados, with Harrison's Cave, which is beautiful to visit, and then you understand the porosity of the coral stone, and you seeing the stalactites, stalagmites. So it's quite interesting to visit.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cave. Like, I recommend if you go there, absolutely go to Harrison's Cave.
Yeah, and so it's quite unique in the sense that the water is underground. So we are very lucky at Mount Gay because we have our own well that was dug more than 300 years ago, and it's probably, we think that the distillery is where it is because of the water source, because you need absolutely water to distill, obviously, to ferment and distill. So Barbados is quite unique. Also, one element which is quite interesting, because it's easternmost island of the Caribbean, and that is Dr. Kennedy from the Sugarcane breeding station in Barbados that told me that, and it's a good insight. The fact that we are easternmost, the main wind are coming from the east to west. So Barbados was never contaminated in terms of sugarcane plantation. So it's why we have this sugarcane breeding station that was created in 1881. So it's one of the oldest, where effectively we are breeding sugarcane on the island for the rest of the Caribbean and sometimes for South America. So it's quite interesting that Barbados has also a kind of protected, if you want, habitat for the cultivation in general. And it's very interesting for sugarcane because sometimes you have some disease, and in Barbados, we are quite protected. So it's another element that makes Barbados unique. And of course, the soil, I'm not going to elaborate.
I was going to say really quick, my understanding is at that sugarcane station, there are actually hundreds of different varietals.
It's even thousands, because when I first meet them, and we will talk later about butter plantation. So we wanted to plant the plantation with new breeds or varietals. Dr. Kennedy said we have more than 3,000 varietals on catalog, so we can do anything you want. So from very old to newest breeded varietal, knowing that there's three things that the station is looking for. It's resistance to disease, but also the capacity of generating sucrose, of course, and fiber, also the capacity of generating fiber, because the fiber is used by the main mill of the island, Port Vale Sugar Factory, to generate energy, because it's the bagasse. So when you crush the cane, and this fiber is burnt and is generating electricity or energy. So Barbados is quite unique in that matter, and it's why Barbados also, outside of the fact that it was till 1966 a British colony, and since then we are independent, but benefit from the commerce, of course, of the route of commerce of the British, and sugar was exported, and then rum was exported heavily. So that's it on Barbados. I don't know if you have other question on Barbados. I can talk a long time, as you can imagine. I like history, but just here, there's a small timeline just with some key dates, because we have often the question about our name. Where is coming from our name? Because when you look up old maps, where we are in St. Lucie, usually the name of the plantation were wearing the name of the owner. And so the first owner of the plantation, again, we are talking about the 1650s, were the Sandyford. So in very old map, you see the name. You don't see Mount Gay, you see the name of the owners back then, the Sandyford, then the Sobers. And by the way, this is the Sobers that call Sir John Gay Allyn. Sir John Gay Allyn was a plantation manager. He was also a politician. He was Speaker of the House in Barbados, and he was managing several plantations. One of them, if you know Barbados rum, you know Saint Nicolas Abbey. So he was living in Saint Nicolas Abbey. It was his home, and he was managing this plantation. And his good friend John Sober, so owner of what will become Mount Gay plantation, call him to manage the plantation, and he did an excellent job. Some says that he refined the way of distilling through pots distillation and improved the process. And he was a good man. He was also a very good man in the sense he was also an emancipator. So we have some writings about that. So he was really a good man, to the point that he was named by King George the Third. He was you say anoblished. He became noble. I don't know. You say that.
Abolished.
He became baronet. So I don't know. The king named it baronet. Oh, you say that anoblished.
Oh, okay.
No? Yeah. So he was really a good man. So to the point that when he died, the owner of the plantation, Just Sobers, renamed the plantation in his honor. So since 1803, the date of his death, the name of the plantation was converted from the name of the owners, back then was Sobers, to effectively Mount Gay. And why Mount Gay? It could have been the full name of Sir John is Sir John Gay Allyn. There's and Mount Gay, where we are, the distillery is at the top. It's not really a mountain; it's a small hill, and there's already a Mount Allyn in the parish of St. James. So they decided to name the plantation Mount Gay, the first family name of Sir John. So since 1803, we are wearing this name thanks to this man. Okay, so that's just to put back in context a bit where our namesake is coming from.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to the next slide. We're talking about sugarcane.
Sugarcane. I talked about a bit about that, but what is interesting on this picture is that you can see on the, let's say, the up part of the picture, right in the middle, you can see clearly. So this is a kind of Google Map picture, but you can see clearly the distillery, and you can see our cellars. So all located in the northern parish of Barbados, St. Lucie. And then you have the plantation, which are below, and the plantation are Oxford Plantation and Mount Gay Plantation. On the right-hand side, you see some houses. This is the Mount Gay village. There's a village with like 20, 25 houses. Some of our staff are living in this village. So what is interesting, so if we have to take sometimes I like to talk as a good French, I like to talk about terroir, yeah, because there's a specificity where we are. We were talking about the limestone, of course. There's a clay topping the limestone, and where we are in the north, it's quite windy. It's a very windy parish, which is good. Also, we will see why for the wild yeast. It's an important element. And so one share of our molasses is coming from our plantation, and we will talk about that a bit later. And on our plantation, we are cultivating up to 7 cultivars or different kind of sugarcane, if you want. That then the general mill, the principal mill of Barbados, is transforming into molasses that they are giving back to us. I'm not going into detail into the sugarcane and all the planting material, but what we do is that we are planting per plot. So every plot have a different sugarcane varietal. There's a disease in Barbados, and so we are making sure that our sugarcane is treated in a way to avoid the famous RSD, which is the ratoon stunting disease. And for that, you have to put the cultivar of the sugarcane in hot water, 50-degree water, during 5 minutes or 6 minutes, and the disease goes away. Otherwise, this disease makes your sugarcane small and less productive in fiber and sugar. So we are making sure that on our plantation we are doing that. We are using mainly
let's go back. Can you go back on one slide? Can you just briefly touch on the vinasse usage?
Yeah. So what is the vinasse? The vinasse is the bypass product of the distillation. Once you distill, you have what we call the spent wash or vinasse, which is 80% of water and full of magnesium, calcium, potassium, and lots of organic matter. So one thing that we are doing at Mount Gay, after having done some tests, and by the way, it's a practice which is done in Australia, which is done in Brazil, etc. We spread the spent wash on our plantation. It's a good way to give back nutrients to the plantation, and it's a natural one. Of course, we are capping 18,000 liters per acre, so it's capped, it's controlled, so it's good, it's beneficial for the plants in terms of nutrients. But also, and I forgot maybe to say it, Barbados is quite scarce in water. I said that there's no surface water, but it's quite often we have drought in Barbados, which is a kind of an issue. And so by the way of giving back the spent wash to the plantation, we are also giving back water, so which is quite interesting for the health of the sugarcane. So today we are quite alone to do that, but we spread the word, so more and more farmers around us are asking for vinasse that we are giving for free. So some of our farmers can benefit from the spent wash and the nutrients that it gives.
Yeah, just a little fun fact on that: the vinasse is in Jamaica. That's what they would call dunder.
Exactly.
And they also, some of the distilleries there also do something similar. In fact, it seems to be a practice many places around the Caribbean. So, but it's a great thing what you're doing there. So, okay, water, let's go.
Okay, so I'm going to step in here. Raphael has already given you quite a bit of information about the water scarcity of Barbados. Obviously, as a small coral island, we are entirely dependent on rainfall. And since the ground is porous, the limestone is porous, obviously there is no overland water, as Raphael would mention. There are no rivers, there are very few streams, and obviously during long periods of droughts, those would quickly disappear. I would have had the experience of where I lived, seeing underground streams coming to the surface. This is around the southern side of the island. And then I also have my 104-year-old grandmother. She was giving me stories about when she was growing up, washing at the spring and so on and so forth. So we know that there is water, underground water here in Barbados. And we actually use that information to our benefit at Mount Gay Rum. So all of the water that we use in the processing of Mount Gay Rum actually comes from our on-site well. The well is approximately 300 or just short of 300 feet deep. It was hand dug sometime back in the 1700s because it's the original well that was used by Mount Gay Rum back in 1703. And we're proud to be actually still using that same source of water for all of our processing. The water that comes from the well is already relatively clean in terms of filtration. It has very little solid material in it. So what we actually do is just some softening, and then that water is directly into our mixing process. Now there are three ingredients in the production of rum, three basic ingredients. You have the water, molasses, of course, and then there's the yeast. In terms of the water, as I said, we try to use the water as naturally as possible. And in some ways, we actually use the natural flora and fauna that would have been in that well for over 300 years. So all the different components that would have been used in the water back in the 1700s, we're still using that same quality of water. I've had further experiences. I know there was a serious drought in Barbados over a period of about 5 years, and our water source is so steady that we really did not have many issues in terms of our water supply. So we're very fortunate once again to have our location in the North of the island and to be able to have access to that underground stream, which we use to receive our water. Of course, we do further processing of the water, but that is more so for potable water that's used in the process further down for dilution and so on. But as far as the fermentation goes, we try to use the water in as natural a state as possible. The second component that goes into our Mount Gay Rum production would be the molasses. Now, there is molasses available here in Barbados, and as we explained, we also have our own plantation from which we do receive some molasses. The local molasses is generally of two types. You have the sea molasses, or what's known as blackstrap molasses, and that's primarily what most distillers would use. And this is basically the rejected material from sugarcane production. So it's kind of a byproduct. As sugar production gets more and more efficient, obviously there will be less sugars left in the molasses for the rum producers. So that's always a challenge for us, how to get the most out of our available blackstrap molasses. Luckily and locally, we're able to also receive what we call B-stripe molasses. So this is molasses where you've only removed what we would say 2 rounds of sugar from. So this molasses is much more rich in terms of sugars. So you're talking about maybe 65 to 68% total sugars, as compared to maybe 50 to 54% for the blackstrap molasses. So obviously we want to incorporate as much of that B molasses into our production. It also gives a very distinct flavor to the distillates once it's fermented and distilled. So by using a combination of C and B molasses, we're able to give or produce a number of varieties of liquid, in addition to the use of our several distillation methods. Now, we do import some Caribbean molasses. We always try to go regional, and that is usually imported directly into the Bridgetown port, where we have a storage location, and we would freight molasses from the Bridgetown port to our St. Lucie location. And in St. Lucie, we also have 2 molasses tanks, which gives us the ability to segregate and control the use of the different types of molasses, in order to give us our required product profiles. So that's some of, and here we have a slide showing the 2 different molasses storage areas. The one on the left is where we have a segregated storage. We have 4 molasses tanks there, and they can obviously store the 4 different types of molasses. Each holds approximately 100 tons. So for a total of 400 tons in that storage location.
And I've been inside there, and let's imagine like four medium-sized swimming pools, all filled with very dark liquid. So it's quite impressive, and you can actually walk in between the different in-ground tanks. They're not really like steel tanks. They're like literally like a swimming pool filled with molasses. So
yeah,
right,
and the smell. And the beautiful smell of the molasses also.
Yeah,
it's nice.
It is. It's very strong.
Yeah, it should have mentioned that all of our molasses tanks are actually underground, and that gives us, once again, 2 advantages. Molasses being a very dense, heavy liquid, you would need a very strong tank in order to support the weight of a large volume of molasses. So having it underground actually eliminates that need for some sort of reinforcement. Secondly, if you put the storage on the ground, you have space above ground that you can do other things with. And Barbados being a very small island, obviously we need to make best use of our available space. So the designers of the distillery obviously were very purposeful in the way that they did things. So moving on to fermentation, that's the first stage of the rum production. Now at Mount Gay Rum, we have two separate types of fermentation, which feed two separate areas of distillation. Now, what you're seeing here is our vat loft. This is where we have 5 large wooden vats. Each is approximately 25,000 liters capacity. And these vats are French oak, and they're used to facilitate our open fermentation. You'll notice that the vats are for the most part open top, so that allows, once again, the natural flora and fauna that is synonymous with Mount Gay Rum and Mount Gay St. Lucie to interact with the proprietary yeast which we use to effect our fermentation.
And are they?
In fact,
Are they temperature controlled or just completely natural?
There is some temperature control, but we use it in a very limited basis. Obviously, we want to maintain the yeast in an environment where they're optimally able to produce alcohol. So we would tend to kind of regulate the temperature, but generally speaking, especially during the cooler months, we seldom have to turn on the temperature control equipment.
Okay.
I want to mention about the proprietary yeast which we use at Mount Gay Rum. So this yeast was developed specifically for us based on the well yeast that is part of our terroir here in Mount Gay St. Lucie. So we had a company come in, this is Lallemand Biofuels, and collect a range of different types of yeast and so on that would be found in the cane fields and in the distillery environment and so on and so forth. After that, they would have isolated a particularly useful type of yeast, one that gave us the type of flavor profile that we were looking for. And basically, they would have scaled that up specifically for Mount Gay Rum.
Okay.
So in a way, we're still using the terroir, the natural environment of Mount Gay St. Lucie to affect the product that we're producing.
I think that point is very, if I may, Matt, this point is very important because this is really our signature in terms of taste. It's starting with the fermentation and with our yeast. It's unique. This is our yeast coming from, extracted from our plantation that is then reproduced. So it's really coming from our direct environment and is really delivering the specific taste. I was reading recently a little article about Naison in Martinique, which is, of course, agricole. And they're saying that fermentation for them is 80% of the taste is coming at fermentation. And the same way they are using also their proprietary yeast coming from their plantation. So there's really there's a strong connection between the place you are and what you're doing and the taste and the uniqueness of the taste. And we believe in that. I mean, it's scientifically based on something. It's not a perception. So this is something that we want to continue, obviously, but that we nourish because it's a key marker of our identity in terms of taste. Yeah.
Yeah, usually the esters and aldehydes and fusel oils that are produced in fermentation are what add to that aromatic profile and taste of the liquid as you move further downstream. So fermentation is extremely important.
Yeah, and Fitzroy, maybe you are going to get to this, but how long is the typical batch fermentation in those tanks?
Right. So for the batch fermentation is very slow in terms of, I guess, fermentation time. So we're talking about 72 hours, mainly to reach the point where the wash has fallen. That's to say that the yeast has died and they produce as much alcohol as is possible. But depending on our requirement, perhaps we're doing some R&D work or what have you, we do let our fermentation run for prolonged periods in order to have, let's say, the more natural microbes add their spin on what we produce with our proprietary yeast. So basically, when the yeast has used up as much of the sugars as they can, we also have other microbes that can utilize any remaining sugar and give us that added element of flavor profile.
And I think the Jamaican distillers are famous for this sort of thing of letting things like the fermentation ends in a few days, but then they let it run for several more weeks and accumulate more flavors that are different than what you get just during that initial active fermentation phase.
This is correct. Yeah. So in terms of the vat fermentation, all of the wash, which is the already fermented liquid that's produced here, is actually used in our pot still and in our coffee still production area. So this fermentation area is located right next to where we have our pot stills and the coffee stills. So we keep all the copper distillation elements in one area, and they're effectively fed by the open fermentation system. In contrast, we also have a closed fermentation, which is very temperature controlled, as you were indicating, Matt. Mm-hmm. And here, the fermentation time is obviously much less. So we're talking about 30 hours of fermentation. And we have here 4 fermenters, which range in size from between 65 to 70,000 liters. And we have also, obviously, we do a pre-fermenting step. We have 2 small pre-fermenters, which are about 10,000 liters each. And we alternate those along with the 4 larger fermentation vessels. Once the fermentation is completed, the wash is transferred from those vessels to what we call the beer well, which allows the fermented wash to kind of settle. So you have most of the solids settling to the bottom of the beer well, and we would usually feed the still from a point a little above that settling level. So you're trying to restrict the amount of solids that you introduce into your distillation columns.
So what is the ABV of both types of fermentation? Is it in both cases around 7%?
Right. So we can obtain 7% on our vat fermenters, but we usually aim for 5 to 6. Trudiann will probably go into a little more detail here, but typically for pot still production, you don't want too high ABV rate on your wash. I guess especially since the pot still production is very slow and gradual. For the continuous fermentation or the closed fermentation, we can typically get between 7 to 8%. But even on that side, we also want to have some control, or maybe I should say, we want to have some level of control in terms of what we feed into the still, because the stills are obviously designed to take a certain quantity of alcohol per hour of production. So, for example, if we have 8% in our wash, we would then have to slightly reduce the feed to the still in order to maintain that consistent quality and the consistent running conditions. If the alcohol level falls in the wash to maybe 7%, we can then maybe increase the feed. So we have a constant quantity of alcohol going to the still per hour, and in that way, we're able to better control the distillation process.
Okay. Are you collecting carbon dioxide off the closed fermentation?
Well, no, at this stage we're not actively collecting carbon dioxide, but it's something that we obviously want to look into, as we're a very environmentally friendly company. So this is something that, as I said, in the future we're hoping to be able to do.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So in terms of distillation, well, I would have mentioned that we have several pot stills. So we actually have 4 pot stills, and here we have a picture of at least we can spot at least 3 of them here. So we have 2 pot stills that were made by a company called Macmillan, which are Scottish pot stills, and I think those were installed in the 70s, so around 1975 to 76. And then we also have 2 smaller Spanish-made pot stills. Fragasa is the company who would have manufactured them. and I don't have an exact date on when those two were installed. The Macmillan stills, they're larger. They have a total capacity of about 1,800 gallons, which would be, I think, around about 6,900 liters. And we usually charge them at the level of about 1,500 gallons, which is just below 6,000 liters.
Okay, so that's 1,500 imperial gallons?
Yeah, imperial gallons.
Okay.
Right. The Spanish pots, which are slightly smaller, their capacity is 1,500 gallons, and we usually use about 1,200 gallons of wash there per charge. Both pot stills have a very similar design with two retorts, and we tend to segregate the liquid produced by the two different types of still because, as you know, each type of still has its own unique flavor profile. So we can segregate the Scottish column liquid, the Scottish pot liquid from the Spanish pot liquid, and that would represent at least two of our main marks in terms of alcohol quality or liquid quality.
Right. And I just wanted to say really quickly, the Mount Gay pot stills are among the most unique double retorts I've ever seen in the Caribbean. Like, you can just look at this pot still, and like, that's a Mount Gay pot still, and like all the other ones sort of have a very different shape. The Mount Gay ones just like jump out as being very distinctive to me. So.
Okay. All right. So also in this area, we have our recently refurbished coffee still. I think it was 2 years ago that we had reassembled this coffee still. The elements were scattered between several buildings at Distillery, and we took the time to assemble everything together. We did have to do some refurbishment work, which also took quite a while, but we now have one of the few functioning authentic coffee stills in the Caribbean.
It's quite interesting because here our coffee still is quite unique. Of course, we were helped by the company John Doe and David Pym. I mean, an old, David is probably 70 something years old, so lots of knowledge and help us really to restore this 100% copper coffee still. And according to him, there's only 3 remaining of this style. As he knows two which are in grain whiskey production, and there is ours. There's probably others, I don't know, but from David Pym, it's what he told us. There were some missing parts, so he was helping also to restore, to reproduce the part missing. So it was, I have to say, it was a full team effort, because we used also one of our oldest employee back then that was at Mount Gay when this column still was, this coffee still was decommissioned, so in early 70s. So he was remembering how it was used, the connections, etc. So it was really interesting to put back. And I tell you, it was a 2 years project, and for a reason, because it's we didn't have the original plan, so or blueprints, so we have to John Doe company help us to put back the steel. But it's very unique, with a very unique also liquid profile. We are still finalizing, so it's more medium body, medium body rum. So we are still making some tests and trials to make different marks. So it's a quite versatile also still. So we are quite lucky to have that. Yeah.
And this one was this was installed in the 1930s or 1940s, I believe.
Yeah. This is the story that we got, is that prior to this, and it's very interesting information that gives the notion of what was Mount Gay Distilleries, is that Mount Gay Distilleries, prior to the installation of this coffee still, in the late 20s, that was driven by the demand, like many distilleries, by the way, not just Mount Gay, but driven by the demand of of prohibition, and people wanted to smuggle rum into the US back then. So there was suddenly a demand because the US cannot produce any more alcohol. So all the Caribbean started to produce a lot of rum. And it's true that Mount Gay was a traditional plantation distillery, so only distilling pot still. And you remember the document that you found dating back from 1897, showing that Mount Gay was one of the last distillery that survived the consolidation of distilleries in Barbados. So till the 20s, we were only distilling pot still rum, and then came effectively this high demand, and the owners back then, the Ward family, decided to invest in column steel to supply the demand. Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I believe Dr. Ward mentioned this during Black Dot Day. One of the reasons for this increased capacity was to actually make some of the British Navy rum, especially during World War II.
Yeah, I know that the demand was very high because, as you know, we had a fire at the distillery, and the reason why, and talking again with Frank Ward, he told me that it was because they were running night and day like crazy to supply the demand. I guess it was a war effort of Mount Gay, but so much that the fire occurred. Of course, the production went back right after. But for a couple of months or a bit more, we had the fire, and we had to restart production. So because the demand was so high, and it was putting a lot on this. At the end of the day, small distillery, So
the British Navy. I published about this recently. During the middle of World War II, the British Navy could not literally buy enough rum from their colonies, so they had to sort of start looking outside of the British colonies. But Mount Gay and Barbados was certainly one of the countries that jumped in and added to the Navy's purchases during World War II.
I didn't know that. Yep. Really? Okay.
Yep. No. I mean, there was in 1944, they needed to buy, at one point, they said it needed to buy 3 million gallons of rum, and sort of from all their traditional sources like Guyana and Barbados and Trinidad, they were only able to come up with around 1.4 million gallons. So they ended up buying some amount of rum from Cuba and more from Martinique, actually. And
I remember when you exposed that in New York. I was intrigued by the fact that Martinique was supplying the British Navy.
It was probably molasses-based rum, not agricole, but still very interesting. So.
Yeah. Sorry, Fitzroy, we are digressing.
No, it's okay. Well, you actually raised a good point when you spoke about Reynold Hines, who would be the retired general who would have been working with Mount Gay Rum from back in the 60s. So Reynold was very instrumental in the refurbishment of the coffee still. But in addition, I mean, we actually do still employ Reynold on a contractual basis. Well, two things. The process in the coffee still area, pot still area, is very manual, is very artisan. And that's something that you really cannot teach in a classroom. So what Reynold does, especially when we have special projects, he's usually on site, and he works along with our younger distillers. And that's how we get that kind of knowledge transfer. So this is a continuing process. I would say that we have the pot still production fairly down pat, but we're still relying quite a lot on Reynold in terms of the whole coffee still operation. Once again, the coffee still is a very manual operation, and the operator has to be constantly making adjustments, checking, tasting, so it's important to have his input. It's invaluable to actually have his input.
Okay, this is where I come in. So at Mount Gay, we have 4 different laboratories. We have our, what you call a wet lab at St. Lucie. We also have more of a dry lab, a raw material laboratory in Brannan's. as well as a bottling lab where they will check and do the necessary checks for bottling, as well as the R&D lab, which is where I work. At the wet lab in St. Lucie, they do testing. And again, Fitzroy would have spoken about the water and the molasses, and these are all checks that are done in St. Lucie on site. And some of the equipment that they use, they're gonna have a GC usually to check the different congener levels and alcohol types that we produce in the alcohol, some alcohol strength checks, as well as microbe, because it's important, to look at your yeast and see what they're doing, how they're living, how they're liking the process, because it is a living organism, and it really does take a lot of babysitting and just making sure that everything is going perfectly. And these are some of the tests that are done at our St. Lucie laboratory. In Brandon's, they're more focused on raw material testing. As you can see a picture here of them testing the bottles, as well as being able to check color and the different parameters that keep our liquid consistent for the clients / consumers. In addition, we are also able, because we're very focused on not only being able to make sure that the liquid is the same every time it goes out and every time you have a bottle of Mount Gay, but as I mentioned, we're very conscious of very specific things, and because of that, we do a lot of GC-MS analysis on our rum to make sure that the ethyl carbonate is in specification and safe, as well as phthalates, because it's a few years ago it was a growing concern, and it still is. And for us, we just want to make sure that there are no parts of our process which are impacting our rum production. Yeah. And now on to aging or maturation. And I guess this is where I come in more so than anything else. So Fitzroy would have described how we have the different types of liquid that we produce on each still. So just a point to note, we actually do produce 5 different types of liquid on our pot still, 2 different types on our traditional column, and then coffee still liquid as well. So we've already started with a range of liquids before we even get to barrel type and barrel age and all these other different parameters. But to be noted is that we do mature all of these barrels separately. We don't mix different liquid types when we're doing our maturation process. And the idea here is because we know each barrel is going to impart a unique type of profile, a unique type of flavor onto the liquid. And we want to keep that unique so that when we do come to the blending side of things, that we're able to have a full toolbox of flavors and aromatics to use to make Mount Gay blends. We have a total of 5 bonds at Mount Gay, with the largest holding about 14,000 barrels or so. And in each of these bonds, you're going to have our different types of barrels. We're going to have ex-whiskey, ex-bourbon, ex-cognac. We have some acacia. We have a variety of ex-wine barrels. And again, this is to show the build up before we get to blending, and how we really are very particular about each type of liquid spending the required amount of time in the barrel, so that we have that profile when it's time to blend the final product. At Mount Gay, we age all of our product in St. Lucie, and because of that, we have tropical static aging, which most happens in the Caribbean. And what is unique here is that we're going to have major losses of alcohol as we mature the liquids. For here at Mount Gay, in our first year, we can lose up to 12% of our liquid. And at 10 years old, if we never touched this barrel, never went at it, just left it there in the bond, we could lose maybe up to 49, 50% of the liquid. And we definitely don't want that, because after we took all that time to, keep all these liquids separate and mature them, we don't really want to come back and find empty barrels. So because of that, we do a process called bung filling. And why bung filling is important to us specifically at Mount Gay is because, we have a very unique way of doing it. Firstly, we never mix liquid types. So liquid that has been placed in a barrel after distillation always stays in those barrels. However, after a certain amount of years, what we do is consolidate the liquid among those same barrels to top back up the barrels so that we don't have large losses as we go through the maturation process over the years. And this is very important because while we do lose a lot of liquid with our aging process, it really just speeds up the maturation of the liquid. So there's, a big difference between aging versus maturation. A liquid can be 5 years old, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is the equivalent of a 5-year-old liquid, aged in a more temperate climate, because that enhanced or speeding up of the process really does happen in the barrel itself, and is the exchange between alcohol and the different layers in the barrel. And for us, it's extremely, extremely important to keep that the same every single time, because that's what we use to make, or that interaction is what makes Mount Gay uniquely Mount Gay.
I just want to add one really quick thing there. Will, can you go back? I was surprised to learn these aging bonds are actually the coral limestone, if I remember correctly.
The bond itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bond itself.
Yeah.
And we do have two different types of bonds here. We have these bonds that you're seeing right now, which are the larger ones, and we do have a smaller one, which is traditional concrete, and it just hold a lot less barrels. But again, even though they look the same, the characteristics that you get from bond to bond and in the bond itself do vary when we come to do our blending.
Okay.
Yeah. Blending.
Did you talk about the wood, Trudiann?
Yes, but we're gonna talk about it some more here in blending.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So this slide really just shows you the characteristic flavor profile that we go for here at Mount Gay. And why this is unique is really to introduce the fact that we don't blend a recipe. There are no recipes. You can't open a book and find how you make XO or how you make Black Barrel. It's all about blending to taste. And for that, we do taste each and every barrel that goes into our blends. And why this is extremely important is because when you experience a liquid, you're only going to judge it, or you're only going to be impressed on how it tastes. So for us, that is the most important parameter when we're making a blend. And these 4 profiles are really signature Mount Gay. We're going to vary, obviously, from blend to blend, because, we know that, you get these in clips, but then, however, when you go to Black Barrel, you add a layer of spice. And this is where the different types of barrels come into play, And we do know that, like I said, we have a variety of barrels, and our primary barrels that we use are ex-whiskey barrels, which are American oak, our bourbon barrels, which are heavily charred ex-bourbon, and our cognac barrels, which are French oak. And each of these different barrel types impart a very specific profile on the liquid. The bourbon barrels to give us, a little more spicy flavor coming through. We tend to see that the impact on like vanilla, and then that vanilla flavor, that more almond comes through more on the whiskey over a quicker time. And then our cognac barrels are more to enhance on our fruitiness, and those fruity congeners that you would have built in fermentation are now enhanced or added to when you have the maturation process happening in the cognac barrels. So what you're seeing right now in front of you is our blending bond. So this is separate from the aging bonds. And what happens here is after the barrels have been selected, they're then emptied one at a time to make the specific blend. And here again, like I said, it's very important to know that each barrel is chosen for the individual blend. We don't, it's not a selection based on necessarily just the age of the liquid, but more so on the profile and what are the characteristics that specific barrel brings to the liquid or to the final blend. Yeah. So I'm just going to speak. So again, before we even get to the specific characteristics, just to give you a little on our process of blending and how it goes more from the people end of it. So we select the barrels, and then in the beginning or the first process, I usually go through the I taste each and every barrel to make sure that this specific barrel is appropriate for what we're gonna produce. Because I mean, we could select a 5-year barrel or a 10-year-old barrel, but each of them are not going to be exactly the same. And it's key to keep in mind the blend you're making at the end and what you want that to be. So the first thing that happens is that I select the appropriate barrels and they go towards the blend. After we make the blend then goes to our expert panel. And Fitzroy can talk about that because he is a member of the expert panel. It's a very small panel. And what this panel does is, especially when you're making XO, Eclipse, and Black Barrel, is they make sure it's consistent and that it's the profile that we know each of these different liquid types has. And then after that, at the end of the process, we go to a more general panel where they do a triangle test to make sure that the product that is going to be bottled is the same every single time and matches up against previous liquids. Yeah.
So simply put, I have to make sure that I eat well when we're doing extra because I have a lot of rum to taste.
Yes, extra oil is definitely one of the blends that has the most variants that come through and that we go through the most barrels in order to create. Yeah. So this slide that you're seeing right here really just goes through the different, our main liquids that we make, which are Eclipse, Black Barrel, XO, and and more specifically the type of casks that are used for each of these liquids. So you'll see that, you know, we speak just having the American whiskey cask for the Eclipse. And again, that's because, you know, you get more of those fruity flavors and that maturity that comes through quicker than you would with a traditional bourbon barrel. And then for Black Barrel, because we want that spice coming through, here is where we introduce the bourbon barrel for that blend. And then for XO, which is our triple cask blend, which has X whiskey, X bourbon, and cognac cask. Once again, here, the reason for this is because you want to build on those characteristically Mount Gay notes here. So the cognac blend really just adds to the fruitiness that, you know, comes through already in XO. Yes.
But back to a bit of our action on the community in Barbados. What was the impact of COVID? So there were several impact, of course, in terms of what we did when we had COVID on the island. And by the way, this crisis was very well managed by our government and our prime minister, because they took very early in this crisis the decision to close the island and to have a curfew, and so we were totally confined. And I think it was during 6 weeks, ban on alcohol, etc. So I mean, there were a certain number of measures that were well imposed on Barbadian citizen, if you want. And I think it was a great thing because we went out quite well from this crisis. But at Mount Gay, so of course, what we did was to all the protocol, the health and safety protocol that we did on sanitation. So, for example, even today, when we go on the compound, we have a temperature check. We need to wear our mask. We have hand sanitation. So this is the kind of thing we are doing every day. I mean, we try to avoid public transportation, so we do carpooling also with the staff, so we avoid risk of contamination. We plan all our meetings, space is important. We do more and more the team, the Skype, or any tool that can help us to do a team meeting through the internet. But we also, of course, are helping our community, and we produced hand sanitizer for our community that we gave away. We gave to the police force. We gave to hospital. We and also to on-trade accounts. I mean, restaurants, bars, the one that remain open, of course, because we know that they need that. Everybody needs that. So it was our duty really to you have a slide of the protocol. Yeah, but it was really our duty to help our community, and we are continuing and doing that. I just put that because it was asked a bit earlier, but so just to say that Mount Gay, it's for us, corporate social responsibility is very important, and that specifically in reaction to COVID, we were very on the forefront, so it was a great thing. Talking about CSR, of course, the community outreach is important, but we have three pillars, if you want, on the environmental initiative. We have renewable energy program. So we install. We are totally so we have two sites. We have the distillery in the north of the island, the bottling hall, which is closer to the port for logistic reasons. So where we are in Brandon, where the corporate offices are, and the bottling hall is near the port. Now we are fully independent in terms of energy. All the roof of the bottling hall is covered of solar panels. So now we are totally independent in terms of electricity. So that, in fact, we are selling back the electricity to the grid, but we are offsetting. We are producing more than we need, actually. So that is the first pillar. We did also some installation of solar panel in St. Lucie, but we have to be very cautious. And in that regard, we are following some safety regulation or recommendation. We cannot install right now solar panel on our aging facilities. I mean, our bond, the roof surface of our bond is huge, but you know that the solar panel are attracting high temperature because they are of a material which is attracting the sun, etc. And of course, as Trudiann said, we have a high evaporation rate. So alcohol evaporation plus high temperature, usually it's not a good combination. It's why right now we put only solar panel in the offices building. And even if we would like, it's quite, it could be quite dangerous. So renewable energy is quite important. Why? To have an impact on CO2 emission the most as we can. At the same way, we are using more and more gas, natural gas in our steam production at the distillery. The second pillar is water conservation. So water conservation. So we are using less and less water in our processes. We are reusing water. So that's one thing. We are collecting water. Here you have a picture of a big pond that we dig in the middle of the plantation to collect water. We have the same at the distillery, huge capacity for safety reason, also in case of fire, etc. So that water conservation is very important. The same way you saw we are using the vinasse or the spent wash back, we put it back on the plantation in order to give back water to the land, etc., and nutrients. It's all the same part of the same initiative. It's really about limiting our usage of water or having a kind of closed loop system as much as we can. Okay. And the third pillar is biodiversity. So we have a lot of and I could talk a lot about that because it's one of my baby also, the diversity at Mount Gay, but the biodiversity. But here we are seeing, we are planting lots of trees. Our Prime Minister fixed the aim of planting 1 million trees this year. So we started well the year in Jan with a massive planting phase with the staff of Mount Gay. We're doing that every year. We are planting every year. Local essence could be more mahoganies, could be fruit trees, because we have also a program for 4 years now. We have our own apiary. We have more than 14 beehives now on the plantation, at the distillery, etc. So this is something also which is nourishing our biodiversity, and this is important. Yeah, you're seeing a little picture of our greenhouse, which is helping in that. Yeah.
All right. Trudiann?
Yes, we're back. So one of the things that everybody would have noticed lately is that there have been a few changes to the Mount Gay range of products. And, first by saying, it was definitely a privilege to be able to bring this change to Mount Gay and to be able to present this new portfolio. Not very soon after, being named master blender, but having worked on it for years previously. So that's the first thing. And then
and maybe Trudy, I can add something, is that it's not so often that you give the chance to a master blender to revisit the classic range. Usually, a master blender is reproducing the recipes that were created by its predecessor, in this case, her predecessor. But it's rarely that we ask the master blender to revisit the classic range. You don't ask the master blender, I'm saying something of Johnny Walker, to revisit the red or the black or whatever. No, they are reproducing a recipe that exists for years, etc., and they are reproducing. They are adding their creativity on limited edition, etc., of course. But usually, yeah, it's not something which is quite widely done. And we thought that because of the character of Trudy, her creativity, etc., but it was quite interesting to have her point of view, and it was really a white card to her to say, okay, what do you think about the blend? What do you think you can add to enrich? And because of course the objective is always to enrich and give higher complexity, if you want, of the liquid. And at the end of the day, it was the brief. What Trudy said is that for Eclipse, yeah, it's a great blend, so I have nothing to do. And for Black Barrel and XO, she's going to tell you what she did, but it's her point of view on the classic of the house, knowing that of Mount Gay, knowing that XO. It's a very old blend that it was created by the Jerry Edwards, so in 1991. So it's a staple, if you want, of Mount Gay. So touching something which is a bit sacred for us. I mean, XO is kind of
me too.
Yeah, but you can maybe Trudy, you can tell us a bit your.
Yeah, and I mean, what is key here is, as I would have said before, when it comes to blending, what Jerry would have imparted on Alan and then Alan on me is, to blend characteristically Mount Gay, to appreciate the profile that has always been Mount Gay's profile. So as Raphael said, Eclipse, there was no change necessary. This blend was great the way it was before, and we'll continue to make it that way. But there were some things that, we could enhance on Black Barrel and XO. And for me, the first thing before, making any changes is really to understand the roots and, what makes the liquid unique in itself. And for us, Black Barrel was the finishing. It was spending after, it's unique because it's the only blend we make that we do go through a finishing for. So after we've, aged separately the pot still liquids and the column still liquids, and they've matured and we make the blend, then we take this blend and we put it in the heavily charred bourbon barrels for a finishing period. And that is what is uniquely Black Barrel, being able to impart those spicy notes on a blend that has already been completed. And for me, it was important to keep true to that, keep true to the process of making Black Barrel, but just with making some slight changes. One of the changes we made is liquid is now a 3 to 7 year old blend versus being a 2 before, starting at 2 years before. But the biggest change is the length of time that the blend sits in the heavily charred bourbon. Before, we sat in barrels for approximately 4 weeks. And one of the things that, I felt, we could do here is, increase that time. And people always ask me, like, did you get it the first try? No. When you visit Mount Gay, you'll see, I think they're called 5FGH and all the different variants that we would have went through. But selling on 6 months in this heavily charred bourbon barrel, for me, complemented the blend itself and enhanced those notes that made it uniquely Black Barrel. And then on to XO, as Raphael said, XO is very dear to, everyone's heart. It's characteristically Mount Gay. it's our flagship. And for me, it was only about enhancing the profile that already existed in XO and not necessarily making major changes to the taste of XO. So what I would have done is I would have aged the range. So we now go from 5 years to 17 years, and the ability to showcase more of our older liquids that we have in stock. And the biggest change that we did for XO would be the addition of the liquid aged in the cognac barrel. And as I would have said previously, for me, as I was going through the bonds and getting more familiar, over the past few years with the blends that exist and liquid that we had in barrels, upon tasting the liquid that was already aging in the cognac barrels, it's like a light bulb went off. It complemented XO so much. It really enhanced those fruity notes that we want in the XO blend, and that is why I would have added a cask, because this blend was complex on its own, but no, it just adds that level of complexity to the profile. And as everyone will see when they taste the new XO, it's not drastically different from what it's just, like I said, everything is just bumped a little bit in terms of the profile. Yep. And there's 1703. So 1703 was one of those ones. It was my first release as master blender, and we'll get to these special releases next. But 1703 is never the same blend, and what is unique about 1703 is that each year you have the opportunity to make different blends of 1703. So they're really collector's editions. And in 2019 would have been my release for 1703. And here, what is important here is we tend to showcase not necessarily only the older reserves that we have for 1703, but it's a chance to really, show, what pot still can do, what column still can do. And, I'm playing with the proportionisms a lot, because you don't have to recreate the same blend each time. So it's really, it was an outlet for expression, each year on year. And then we come to the true outlet of, of expression, which is the Master Blender collection. And right, what this is specific for is being able to showcase different wood types, different liquid types. We just spoken about the toolbox. We start at the fermentation with our different types of fermentation. We build on that with distillation and all the different stills we have and the different marks or different liquid types that we remove from these stills. And then we come over to maturation here, where we have different wood types, and you add another variable on top of that with time. So here it is. For me, what is important is to showcase what you wouldn't traditionally see for Mount Gay, and also to bring everyone on that educational journey with us, because now you have an idea of the components that we taste, what happens in different types of barrels, and it really is a way for persons who are very interested in rum knowledge to be able to understand what is happening and experience the maturation, the different wood types, the different liquid types that we have here at Mount Gay. So we would have started with peat smoke, which was definitely a different profile from what we traditionally, very smoky, because it was aged or finished in peated whiskey, Scotch whiskey barrels. And that would have been the first master blender collection we had. And that would have been done by Alan Smith. And then we moved on to have pot still, which was my first release as master blender. And it was really just honoring, as we would have talked about earlier, how we have made pot still from the beginning. And I feel like, in Barbados, we have a very unique pot still type. Pot still is what adds that dryness to our rum profile. And it was very important to, like I said, bring everybody on that journey so you understand like what that component tastes like, what, the characteristics it brings to the different Mount Gay blends. And like I said, just, paying respect and honoring a tradition of how we've always made rum. And for everyone who would have realized, there's another picture on this slide, which is going to be our newest master blender collection. And here we took the opportunity to show what happens when we age in a cask that's not traditionally used in any of our Mount Gay range. And this is the port cask expression. And persons can expect to be able to enjoy this blend later this year.
Just a little comment on what you said, Trudy. So, yeah, what makes us unique? It's from the ingredients, so or water or yeast, the two types of molasses, the local and the regional. It's all the complexity of the process of fermentation, distillation with the various number of stills, the way we are aging separately, static tropical aging. So our product are not leaving our bone of Saint Lucie in the north of Barbados. And then if effectively there's the art of blending, it's the artistry of Trudy of blending those different elements together with different maturity, with the different taste and all the woods that we are exploring. And I have to say that being part also of Rémy Cointreau is also an asset because we have access to very nice woods and barrels. Could be cognac, could be coming from Islay, etc. So we have very nice access to barrel. One other element also, which is very important, is the complexity of those products is natural. Is the artistry. There's no added element like sugar or boisé or this kind of thing. So it's really everything made on the island within the perimeter of what we just explained today. So that is very important also. So I wanted to precise.
Right. All right. So at this point, we have a whole bunch of questions stacked up here. The first,
I guess,
from our friend Dave Russell. He's asking if,
hey Dave,
yes, if
long
Mount,
time no see.
did Mount Gay ever make entirely sugarcane juice rum, like in the past, going back to the 1700s?
We don't think so. So I have a big discussion with my friend Richard Seal about that because he thinks that we probably did. I'm not sure. I'm not sure because really and truly the birth, if you want, of rum and particularly at Mount Gay is really coming from those molasses that were left over, etc., etc. So I truly believe that. Or maybe they have been in Barbados by some other plantation occasionally, but the art of what we are doing in Barbados is really a molasses-based rum. And I want and in a few years I will demonstrate the how noble it is because for me and I think Trudiann is sharing my views. There's a richness in using the molasses as a raw material because conversely to sugarcane juice, which is goes in one direction, the molasses is super rich. Is super rich in organoleptic elements, in minerals. It's a very rich. Yes, it's considered as a bypass product of sugar production, but actually it's super rich. It's super rich. So in terms of flavor profile that you can develop at fermentation is just the complexity compared to juice is just nuts. So
this is mostly sucrose based, so it's gonna ferment down to practically mostly ethanol. So there's a complexity that comes from molasses, and we may not have traditionally made a blend strictly fermenting juice, but we have done juice trials and we do have some R&D that's coming through where we do look at all of these things because for us it's not just about saying molasses is preferable. It's really about going through the metrics, going through the maturation, understanding the difference that fermentation brings and impacts what the product is like or what the liquid is like when you get further downstream.
Right. No, I mean, in my experience, we see, there may have been washes back in the early days where part molasses, part sugarcane juice, and as well, we would see that, for example, as the price of sugar might go up or down, and the price of rum may have been out of sync with that maybe a distillery didn't decide to make from cane juice for a while, and then when sugar became more valuable, then they would switch back to more sugar production. So I think it's really hard to know for any one distillery, short of having their records from way back then. But it's not a monoculture of like everything's been made from molasses for the last 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the fascinating part of history is seeing how these things evolved. So Dave has another question. Prior to the 1930s, did Mount Gay use any sort of wood other than oak, like chestnut or other type of barrels?
So what is the question?
So basically, prior to the 1930s, was there any sort of aging in something other than oak? Are there any records of like what sort of other sorts of cask may have been used?
So very quickly, there were no more, because of the expansion of the sugarcane industry. You have to imagine Barbados was a kind of, there were only a few inhabitants, some Arawaks on the island before the arrival of the British. So imagine this small island was covered of forest. And look, and you went to Barbados, so the action of a growing sugarcane industry was what? To cut all those forests. So very quickly, there were not any more indigenous trees. And the only remaining that were kept planting were the mahogany. But we know that mahogany is not good for... it's good to make furniture, but the sap of the wood is not good and could be toxic for consumption. So we know that probably there were some barrels made with local wood, but very quickly there were no more local woods. So that's the issue. It is why with the commerce between England and Barbados,
right.
Very quickly the ships were coming with brandies, with port, with Madeira wine. They were coming with those barrels, and the rum industry very quickly used those barrels because there were no wood on the island, simply as that. And probably the oak wood, which is one of the most common wood used for aging, is used in lots of countries like France, like Spain, etc., Italy, etc., to age wine or spirits. So it was probably easier of access. But chestnut, yeah, we have chestnut, we have acacia, we have also in our bonds we have some and different kind of oak. By the way, we are talking about oak, but there's hundreds of species of oak. So and even in France, you have several. You have from Tronchet. You have different kind of oak in Europe, even in the US, etc. And our the whiskey distillery that Rémy Cointreau own on the Pacific side of the US, they are using also different oaks. I mean, there's so many different oaks, so there's a richness in that too.
Yeah. Another history question. When approximately did Mount Gay develop and start using its own proprietary yeast?
So we're talking about 6 years ago when we start the process. So before that, we are using commercial yeast. And it's a process that started with an agronomist that help us, that is working in wines and that help us to, big names in Burgundy that help us to do that, and it's Emmanuel Bourguignon, Dr. Bourguignon, that help us to do that. And I think it was, and then we have the help of L'Allemand, exactly. L'Allemand, which is reproducing our yeast, etc. So yes, it's in the history of the recent history of Mount Gay. It's recent, but we can imagine that before the commercial yeast, it was the case in practically in almost all distilleries. They were using their local yeast. I mean, it's just that after probably the 1800 and 1900 where the commercial yeast took over, but probably it's not probably, it's sure that originally it was again wild yeast. So the yeast coming from the local environment. I mean, the nearby environment.
Yeah.
But,
so
our proprietary yeast is Saccharomyces. So it is.
So that actually leads into the next question. I remember you said that there were two different types of fermentation. So two-part question. Number one, is how many different types of yeast strains do you currently use? And number two, are they separate for the batch fermentation versus continuous fermentation?
Well, we actually can use it. We actually do use the properties in both the batch fermentation and the continuous. Once again, on the continuous fermentation using the same yeast and same substrate of molasses, we actually get much higher alcohols. On the sorry, that's on the continuous side. On the batch fermentation, we tend, as I said, to limit the amount of alcohol that we produce in the wash. So the temperature control, I guess, plays a large part in that. But basically, we tailor the type of fermentation to the type of distillation that we plan to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's actually one of the other variables we have. So it's very thought out. The yeast type is specific to the length of the fermentation as well as the place where the fermentation is going to occur. So where we tend to know that we want to have we only do our longer fermentations, obviously in our back side where there's the open fermentation. And over there, we're specific to using the proprietary yeast because we, the profile that we're going to get over there, we're very sure about it. We know what we want it to be. And also it gives us the opportunity where sometimes the intermediaries for fermentation or finishing the fermentation, we don't want. So we're clear that, if we stop around 5% or so, that, when we go to distill, we're going to get the congeners that we want.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Speaking of sort of variables here, another question is the molasses sourcing. Like we know that you're able to get some of the molasses from Barbados, but the molasses you buy from elsewhere, are you able to ensure it's pretty much always from the same place, or do you end up buying from different producers in different countries? And then, which case then do you end up with sort of like different resulting flavor profiles that you then have to work around?
Just a precision, sorry, Fitzroy, if I intervene. Just to say that we are not alone. So to be in this case, outside of Saint Nicolas Abbey, of course, which is distilling only the cane of its plantation, we are all importing. Roughly, the supply of the local molasses is 20%. Is between 15 for some others, but. Yeah, so it's a limited amount that we get from Barbados, and effectively the rest is imported. We used to import almost solely from Guyana. You know that a few years ago, even Guyana cannot produce enough molasses, and this is a big issue when they stop their mill because we had a constant, and their mill were quite inefficient. So we are quite happy with the Guyanese quality. Lots of sugar. I can now it's mainly Dominican Republic and Guatemala. Fitzroy is there.
We've also had from Panama as well in recent years. So as I say, we try to stick to the regional suppliers as much as possible.
Do you get taste differences from them, or is it pretty much at that level? It's fairly consistent in terms of end.
Well, in terms of end result, we do have different profiles, and this is usually noticed on the gas chromatograph level. It's not often because we would adjust our processing. We'll make adjustments to still and to the processing, so as we can get a consistent quality liquid coming out. But you will get some variation in your levels of the different congeners, but still within our acceptable range.
Okay, so basically you're able to adjust the fermentation.
Basically that's what we have to do.
Okay. Okay. Ivar asked, from all the stills at Mount Gay, do you have a particular favorite?
This is for me, I imagine. Well, I mean, most people love pot still liquid.
Yeah.
Most people like that complex character of pot still liquid. In terms of the distillers, obviously they like a still that's easy to operate and less work. So we actually have two main column stills. This is outside of the coffee still. One is a 2-column still, which is very basic operation. You have your analyzer column, which basically separates your wash into alcohol vapors and the vinasse, which is the base material. Then you
this
have the
is
rectifier column.
the web
Yes, that's the red
design.
still.
Yeah, made by John Doe. Yeah.
Right, and the rectifier column basically purifies your alcohol streams. This gives us a medium body distillate, and this is one that we use a lot for aging. So you'll find that distillate in a lot of the Mount Gay products once aged. We also have a 3-column partially vacuum still, so it's a little more complex. It's like a 2-column still with the analyzer and rectifier. Those operate at a vacuum level. I think it's around 340 millimeters of mercury. But in the middle of those, you have what we call the stripper or the dilution column. So that column actually takes part of the condensed vapors from the analyzer, and we add water basically to reduce the level of the different congeners in that liquid, and then that is eventually fed into the rectifier column. So with this 3-column still, we can actually produce a very clean light spirit. Well, we can produce a range, so we actually get two marks from this particular still. One light to medium body, and then one pretty light, almost to the neutral spirit.
What is the typical ABV of the 2 marks coming off of that?
Right, both are around 95.5 to maybe 95.9% alcohol. So all the columns, well, those 2 column stills give us the higher ABV rates.
Okay. And Trudiann, do you have a particular favorite still?
I don't play favorites when it comes to the stills. It is important, for me that we have all these different types of liquid, well, there are some that stand out by themselves, and, we may have released a pot still, a pot still liquid. Like I said, it was, is the education process, but, we do each of them separately, and each of them are tools that I use when it is time to do our blend. So, I tend not to play favorites.
Okay. Question near and dear to my heart, which I could ask the same question. It says, I have both the first and second editions of the Distiller's Origins gift packs. Do you have any plans to do additional things like that?
At the moment, I any education or any experiential liquids that you'll get are gonna come from the Master Blender collection. I'm not gonna. You see, there was a pot still in the limited edition that you're referring to, but that was a pot still blend, which is very different from the pot still that we would have released under the Master Blender collection. But along the same concept, is really to bring everyone on that journey of blending rum, of understanding what's happening in our bonds, the maturation in different types of wood from different stills. So it's along the same lines, but not necessarily in that.
Matt, I'm very glad that you liked these editions, because it was exactly that. It was educational. It was really to make the understand people what is the different, what is the impact of steel. So pot steel, column steel, everything the same. We're changing the steel. So what is the difference? What is the impact of a barrel? So it's true that it was made for education purpose, but unfortunately, we didn't have the demand that we thought. We thought that it was, sorry, but smart, and that people will be interested by that. And in fact, it was very limited. I was surprised, but it was very limited interest. So
really, yeah, I mean, it seemed like they were far enough ago that, like, if you put them out again today, you might get a different response.
Okay, we have some stock, so, we can.
I mean, if you did a third, I think it would be like a great idea would be to do between the Scottish pot stills and the Spanish pot stills, like that would be another fun to do. So, another history question from, you guessed it, Dave Russell. What was the difference between Mount Gay sugarcane brandy and the other rums made at the same time?
Oh, good question. Yeah, sugarcane brandy was a rum. We have to stop it for a reason. I guess he's asking because we stopped it. In fact, it was a kind of illegal naming, because brandy, it came from a spirit that are made from the base is made from grapes, and in fact it was a nickname that that in Barbados we gave to this rum, and more than a nickname, it was the brand itself, because the quality of the rum was such that it was considered as a brandy, you know. But the quality, it was more between, it's closer to what is today Black Barrel, even though we didn't have the principle of finishing in a different cask, but in terms of age level, etc. So it was above Eclipse. It was not at the level of XO, but it was effectively a more mature rum than Eclipse. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was sold solely in Barbados. Yeah, sugarcane brandy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I have one more question, and I know I've had it several times, and I know I've asked Frank Ward, but I think our other listeners would be interested to hear it as well. Is in Barbados history, the rums were often described as double distilled, and in traditional Caribbean double retort pot still rum, like you can run it once through a pot still and it's of sufficient strength and you're sort of done. But then these, Mount Gay has these double retort pot stills, but the labels say double distilled, or I think it was redistilled.
Redistilled, exact, redistilled.
Maybe Fitzroy or Trudiann can explain what that redistilled actually means in sort of a modern context.
Well, it's actually what it sounds like. So we actually distill the liquid twice.
Twice.
Yeah. So on the first pass, we go from wash to what we term locally common rum, which is usually maybe around 50-60% ABV. After that, we take the common rum and we would obviously clean the pot, and then we reintroduce that liquid into the pot with no wash, and that has the effect of raising the ABV. So then we end up with something, let's say between 75 and let's say 82% ABV, and it also kind of cleans up the taste of the spirit. So as you know, with pot still distillation, you have the head, the heart, and the tails of the distillation process. And obviously, we want to collect the heart of the process. Just imagine the quality of the liquid if you do that twice. So the second time around, you're reintroducing what was the hearts of the first distillation,
right. And
once again, you're kind of removing the heads and the tails. So you're taking the best of the best, right, so to speak.
Right.
So that's what we do at Mount Gay.
Okay, and so that second distillation, are you diluting the results of the first distillation before you redistill it?
No, normally no. We reintroduce the common rum at the ABV that it was collected at.
Great. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic. I think we've covered a lot of topics. We've had some great questions. We've run way over on time, but I think everybody's quite happy to see what we've covered here. So I personally want to thank all of you for participating.
Thank you, Matt.
Oh yes, Will, do you have anything to say on the way out?
No, I'll just echo, thank you to everyone for sticking around for so long. I've been watching over where everyone's attending, and usually, you go past an hour and 15 minutes, you start to see people that, they have to get to other appointments and stuff, but everyone was really staying around, listening to everything. So thanks to the three of you for going over time and answering so many questions. This was great. Matt, thank you for bringing it all together, and I'm excited to see who we have coming up next.
Me too.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you as well.
All right.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.